Welcome to TVBS Meeting Room, where we tackle global issues with a view from Taiwan. I'm your host, Wen-Chi Yu. Cross-Strait relations is fundamental to the stability and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific region. It's also one of the hardest relationships to manage. Today, we're pleased to have Daniel Russel and Chien-min Chao, who have been intimately involved in U.S.-Taiwan-China relations for decades. Daniel Russel is currently a vice president at the Asia Society Policy Institute. Formerly, Danny was responsible for Asia-Pacific policy in the Obama White House and at the U.S. State Department. Chien-min Chao is currently a dean at the Chinese Culture University. He's a former deputy minister of Mainland Affairs Council in President Ma Ying-jeou's administration. Welcome, Danny and Dean Chao.
Thanks, Wen-Chi, and hi to all your viewers.
You've been involved in U.S.-Taiwan-China affairs for decades. And this trilateral relationship has changed significantly since you were last in the government. What do you think is driving those changes? I'd like Dean Chao to maybe focus on factors in Taiwan and Danny to focus on factors in the United States. Of course, feel free to comment on China and Xi Jinping's leadership as well.
Thanks, Wen-Chi. Well, look, I think that when it comes to the connection between U.S.-China relations, which are clearly deteriorating, and cross-strait relations, that there's a visible correlation between the two tracks. And the dramatic downturn in U.S.-China relations and the advent of kind of adversarial strategic rivalry, I think, is really a function of fundamental mismatch between Xi Jinping's vision for China in the world and the values and the system that the United States and other Western countries have built and that Taiwan embraces. So the U.S.-China strategic rivalry is clearly a negative factor in cross-strait relations for no other reason than it sort of removes an important reason for Beijing to show restraint, and it casts the U.S. actions towards Taiwan as part of an attack against Beijing's core interests in the eyes of the mainland. When you add these things up, it puts us in a very difficult position.
And Dean Chao?
Well, there is also a rivalry in this part of the world. And the contestation between mainland China and Taiwan is not very symmetrical. It's a symmetrical relationship. And there are two realities, seems to me. On the one hand, you see China is much larger than Taiwan. And China has been resorting to not a very friendly policies regarding Taiwan. We have been under constant suppression, intimidation, and threats, to almost every respect of our life. So there is certainly many people who are very angry towards the other side. So politicians, also, public opinions, people have been divided as accordingly. One group of people, politicians, and one party is very keen on grasping this very tender relationship and trying to stoke the tensions between the two sides in order to reap political benefits.
Can you be specific about the political party you were?
The ruling party, the DPP. But on the other hand, there's also people who are also very angry towards mainland China, but they are also very fearful about possible attack. So they try to reach out to the other side. They try to calm the other side. But what has been the case is that U.S. used to be a balancer between the two sides in this policy of a strategic ambiguity. U.S. tried to maintain stability by suppressing any dangerous ideas coming from both sides. And in that time, I think, the peace movement and the efforts to seek peace in the Taiwan side is much easier. But right now, as Daniel suggested, there's a fierce competition between U.S. and China. Seems to me U.S. doesn't mind other countries or peoples in this part of the world challenge in China. And that has tipped the balance. So, so right now the independence movement people, I think they are encouraged, and they continue the efforts to stoke the tensions. That has made the situation not much worse.
So from what I'm hearing from both of you, Danny was saying how Xi Jinping's vision of the world and maybe the role of China is significantly different from how the US and Taiwan, and obviously a lot of the Western world views, the role of China. But from Dean Zhao's point of view, the role of US has also changed significantly because of, the changing proposition. Now it's more of a competitor kind of relationship between US and China, as well as maybe the ruling party right now in Taiwan seems to be the change factors. So now let's go back to when you guys were in the government, many years ago. President Xi Jinping and President Ma actually met in Singapore in November 2015, and that was a historic Ma-Xi summit. Maybe give our audience a quick overview regarding sort of what came out of the summit, its impact on Taiwan from Taiwan's perspective, and how the U.S. viewed the summit at that time. Maybe we can go with Dean Zhao.
Okay. Dean, please.
Well, as you said, Wenqi, it was a historical moment. For a long time before that, the two sides, only thing the two sides knew was to fight against each other. And they knew nothing about reconciliation. They wanted peace, but there was no way there's no path leading to that, peaceful road. So the Ma-Xi summit in November 2015 was the very first time the two sides had an opportunity to actually meet face to face. And if you remember, the delegation led by Xi Jinping was really very impressive, including the top level politicians like Wang Huonin, Li Zhanshu, and right now Ding Xuexiang. They are all members of the Politburo Standing Committee. So I think that was really a good opportunity for the two sides to get something out. And they did get something out. Also, they agreed to set up a telephone hotline. So in case of any crisis, they will be able to reach to the other side. They also agreed to continue the talks on Cross-Strait free trade agreement. That was extremely important, because as of now in East Asia, there is only two countries that have not been able to include it in this regional free trade agreement, which is North Korea and Taiwan. We had a chance, but that was the window was very short. But 2 months later, there was a change of ruling party here in Taiwan, and that chance was gone.
Yeah, I mean, clearly at that time, I think Taiwanese people or Taiwanese public opinion had a different view of this Ma-Xi summit as well as the trade agreement. And Danny, how did the U.S. view that cross-strait relationship at that time?
Well, we were heartened, frankly, by the progress made during the Ma Ying-jeou administration in cross-strait relations, and wanted to see it continue. Positive cross-strait relations created space for the U.S. and China to engage in our bilateral relationship. And as I said earlier, I think it worked the other way as well, that a relatively stable and positive relationship between Beijing and Washington created space for the Ma administration to make headway, as Dean Chao alluded to. I think the Ma-Xi summit itself we saw as important symbolically, as a hopeful sign that there could be continued progress in cross-strait relations. We certainly hope that it would lead to an ongoing constructive dialogue. But at the same time, we weren't naive, and we didn't have too many illusions about what to expect from the PRC. You know, it came in the run-up, as Dean Chao said, to the presidential election in Taiwan. So we understood that Beijing might be trying to put its thumb on the scale, so to speak, in the elections. I remember Xi Jinping, who seems to love these maritime metaphors, warned, he said something like, you know, the ship of peaceful development will sink if the Taiwan side, you know, doesn't cooperate, or something to that effect, kind of an implicit threat. I remember he also made some sort of appeal to ethnicity, you know, as if all Chinese people all over the world somehow belonged to Beijing. He made sort of nationalistic appeals that I don't think resonated really on Taiwan. I remember also President Ma's made important points about rejecting Beijing's attempt to isolate Taiwan diplomatically, rejecting military pressure, economic exclusion, and calling for patience, which certainly is still badly needed. But once you remember, you know, the world doesn't stand still. This is a different era now, and the status quo isn't frozen in time. It's a constant balancing act.
I think my question for Danny in particular was the U.S. aware of sort of the discrepancy between how Taiwanese people at that time, the public opinion, felt about, you know, Taiwan cozying up to mainland China, vis-a-vis sort of, you know, the government's intention, which is obviously good, but somehow it didn't really get the kind of public support, right? Was the U.S. aware of that, and was the U.S. worried about that development? Because fast forward, we'll talk about it, you know, next is, I mean, the Chinese public opinion has veered so off from even just 10 years ago or 15 years ago in terms of its view, its relationship with China right now.
Yeah, we were certainly aware, and you'd have to be blind not to have seen the Sunflower Movement and the domestic opposition to the Cross-Strait Agreement on Services. So yeah, that was not a secret. On the other hand, and I should say that's one of the strengths and wonderful attributes of democratic systems, which is that it's all out there. Mm-hmm. People tell you what they think. Obviously, there was no inclination in the United States government to, in some fashion, intervene in the politics of Taiwan or the workings of the government in its policies with respect to domestic public opinion. But we had terrific lines of communication. We discussed a whole host of issues very candidly, very constructively, issues that could impact the prospects for continuing to keep the Taiwan Strait peaceful, continuing to keep the bilateral and trilateral relationships moving in a positive direction. So I'm sure that there was no shortage of advice from Washington, but the responsibility for managing politics and public opinion rests exclusively with the government in power on Taiwan.
Well, fast forward to today, U.S. and Taiwan recently both had their midterm elections. Want to talk about elections because I think in the past, a lot of people could separate sort of foreign relations or cross-strait relationship more independently from domestic politics, but increasingly, it's really tight, even in the U.S. We see sort of China as a factor in all the elections, even local ones. So while the midterms were domestically focused, the outcomes are really certain to have some impact on U.S.-Taiwan-China relations because of their implications on 2024 presidential elections. So what are your views from midterms to 2024, and how will the presidential campaign platform look like over the next year or so? We'll start with Dean Chao, since Taiwan's election is pretty much in just 1 year of time.
Well, we understand that China right now internationally is in a very difficult time. Because of the COVID-19, China's policies weren't exactly welcome. And also its wolf diplomacy, and China is much bigger today, and many of its foreign policies are quite assertive. Plus Hong Kong, the handling of Hong Kong, Xinjiang human rights, and in the Taiwan Strait area, so on and so forth. So it's not surprised to see China's international standing support rate has been on the decline throughout the Western democratic world. That said, you understand there is also the feeling in Taiwan that has been, towards China. There is a part of Taiwanese, quite a few Taiwanese. They have been quite disappointed or angry by China for a long time. So right now, I think what's happening is that whenever there's an election in all those democracies in the Western world, Taiwan included, South Korea, Japan, Germany, Great Britain, not to mention the United States, there's a China bash in. And the China bash in is the most severe here in Taiwan. But the problem is that the thing is that when everyone else is doing this, that has, sort of justified the Taiwanese who some politicians have been doing this for decades. Somehow they find, support, international support. That's very important for them. So take the president. I don't think she's doing a good job as a president. She has suffered two great losses, both local elections this year just happened 4 years ago. If it was not because of Hong Kong umbrella revolution and the way she exploited the tensions between Taiwan and China, she wouldn't have won the election in 2 years ago. So it's not a surprise. Another great defeat has been inflicted. But the problem is that what's left to the ruling party seems to me the only viable option is to again stoke the fear factor among the Taiwanese. That was the case too. Just during the election,
but I do want to say the military threats and all just the harassment from mainland China, these were real.
Well,
right?
but I tell you, if you refer to the public opinion surveys, because we have been crying wolf for too long, nearly 70% of Taiwanese people don't believe Chinese would attack. Nearly 70% of the Taiwanese people believe the United States would come to help. It's on this public opinion backdrop that the ruling party has been able to do the things they have been doing.
Danny, what is your view?
Well, I'd be a little careful about convincing ourselves that the threat from the mainland is simply crying wolf, that people can. It may be that people have trouble imagining the mainland attacking, but it may also have been that people in the Ukraine had trouble believing that Russia would attack. In any event, I think, it's true that you can't separate domestic politics, domestic attitudes from foreign policy, but at the same time, the lesson from the midterms in both Taiwan and the United States is that, predictions about an election outcomes are not reliable. It's more like the World Cup final than it is a math problem where you can calculate what the answer is going to be. And you certainly cannot draw a straight line from the results of local elections or the US midterms to what's going to happen 2 years later in elections for national office, in part, as Dean Chao pointed out. Look at the example of Taiwan midterms in 2018 and national elections in 2020.
I do want to say, though, the flipping of the House, for example, now the Republican Party is in charge of the House of Representatives. I would like your view. Do you think that's going to harden Washington, D.C.'s stance on China even more?
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable expectation. China is certainly going to factor in national elections in the U.S.
Absolutely.
And as far as party platforms, I think neither candidate will want to be open to the accusation that they're weak on China. Mm-hmm. A lot of people have pointed out that concern about Beijing's behavior is one of the very few things that the two parties in the U.S. can both agree on. And there's always the risk that the candidates get into a competition over, in China bashing, who can be tougher. And that leads also to the risk that statements and actions that are really more intended for domestic consumption in the United States can actually trigger actions by Beijing and create problems that we don't want to see. So,
and are you worried about this trend in Washington, D.C. right now?
Yes, I think that the U.S. Sort of political class may have overcorrected to an extent. Deterrence isn't made up entirely of some military preparation and tough talk. Deterrence is about convincing the other side not only that it can't succeed in using military force, but that it doesn't need to. That this is not a make or break moment. The window for making political progress is not about to slam shut. And I think, moreover, that we shouldn't think of engagement with China as some kind of concession. It's not surrender. The United States needs effective lines of communication. Taiwan needs effective lines of communication with Beijing. And it's been extraordinarily difficult for the last several years for either of us to convince Beijing to sit down and really talk.
I think partially Beijing has also recognized just, domestic politics is at play in the US as well as in Taiwan. So, we have to talk about a more, I like to use the word nuanced, but I also don't like to use the word because it's not really welcome right now in either Taiwan or Washington, D.C. But is the 92 consensus dead? And how does the U.S. See the 92 consensus? Would you like to see it back to the discussion table? Let's start with Dean Chao.
Well, I hope not, but it's increasingly difficult for Taiwan. Taiwan. I, for one, Daniel, I'm for one who wants Cross-Strait the relationship to be handled responsibly. And because of that, I do believe there is a very severe risk in this part of the world. I think politicians should really, act responsibly too. But unfortunately, because of it's a democracy, votes, seeking votes is the utmost important thing. But to answer your question, I hope 92 consensus is still there, because Beijing hasn't abandoned it. That's a good news, because if they also abandon the 92 consensus, we will be much bigger trouble today. But it's not really very difficult, very easy to suggest, not even to say we want peace with mainland China is becoming increasingly difficult. Exactly because if you want peace, if you want to go to the other side to argue with them, and to take our course to the other side, and hats like surrendering to Taiwan, selling out Taiwan, and befriending China, all sorts of labels would come along. So I think the United States has a role to play. I think Taiwanese, especially, the ruling party, they don't listen to anyone. They don't listen to us. They want votes. I think somebody needs to tell them they need to reach out to the other side. There's a problem. The People's Liberation Army is coming. And there is a huge problem here, and they need to address the problem. But it seems to me, we here as a scholar, we keep reminding the government that there's an issue here. You need to talk to the other side, but they wouldn't listen.
I wonder if the KMT actually has any space to run on that platform next year. In particular, I think, a lot of people in Washington, D.C. are wondering, does the KMT have any chance of winning in 2024, just given where the public opinion really is? Danny, your view is, what about 92 consensus from Washington, D.C.'s view?
Well, my view certainly was and is that the 92 consensus is a kind of political fig leaf. I bet there's not more than about 1,000 people in all of Taiwan who really could explain to you what the 92 consensus precisely is, and there's probably not a dozen people in Washington that could do that. But it's a formula. It's a formula, political formula, that made it possible for for Taiwan and for the mainland to basically shelve an irreconcilable difference and to move on to more practical and constructive forms of engagement. So from my point of view, number one, I have recognized that neither the DPP nor the KMT is talking about the 92 consensus right now, or willing to embrace it. But secondly, more importantly, that any mechanism that can allow Taipei and Beijing to essentially shelve the underlying political dispute, the unresolved issue, and permit practical and peaceful cooperation, any formula that can get the two sides there is welcome to the United States.
But the problem is that Daniel, there's none. I understand that the 92 consensus is not exactly ideal, but as you said, as long as it works, doesn't matter what it stands for. The problem is that there are people here for political purpose. They have put the 92 consensus to the death row. There's, it's very hard to bring the life out of it any longer. But what's the alternative? There's no. I think it's fine. I agree. The ruling party should get their own consensus, whatever it is. They need to reach out to the other side, whatever the formula it is. They need to work on that. But the problem is that they keep poisoning the 92 consensus. The only viable option that has been killed. But in the meantime, they have nothing to offer. That's the problem.
So I think we're nearing the end. I have to ask, so what is next for a cross-strait relationship? And the role of the United States clearly matters. So what should the role of the United States? Danny, your advice.
Sure. Well, very quickly, I mean, my expectation, frankly, is that cross-strait relations are going to remain tense, with China ratcheting up pressure and using actions by the Taiwan side and by the US as sort of a pretext to claim that it's just responding. But the leadership in Beijing might be inclined to exercise some restraint until it can see the results of the Taiwan election in early 2024, especially in light of the KMT's strong showing in the midterms. And let's hope they want to be patient. I think the key question really is how well Taiwan can use that time to build up more resilience, to build up deterrence. As far as the US, look, the role of the US continues to be to help to reduce the risk of conflict and reduce the coercion, the pressure on Taiwan, while also protecting the democratic system and helping to protect the rights, the liberties, the society, the economy that the people on Taiwan have built up over the decades.
Now, Dean, what is your expectation of the role of the United States?
Well, given the huge gap of power between the two sides, mainland China is much larger. I don't think it's a good idea to simply increase Taiwan's defense capability, that is very important. But I think right now it seems to me we are putting too much emphasis on that. It seems to me that's the only option. We need to take the other factors into consideration. I think certainly right, Beijing has been unreasonable. I think Beijing needs to act more responsibly. We need to keep Beijing, reminding Beijing they need to do better than that. But in the meantime, I think we should also address the issue. This is an interactive relationship between the two sides. I think why we have to ask why Beijing is so angry. Is there any reason that we may be able to do to calm them down so that they'll be willing to talk peacefully and reasonably? What I'm saying is that to me, the United States, I think we are grateful that the US is helping us to keep China on check. But in the meantime, I think the US should also remind our ruling party they have a role to play, and which is very important. And this is why Beijing is so angry. And that US, I think they often forget. They think about democracy, human rights, and Taiwan DPP is a democratic party, and so on and so forth. And, I think they tend to forget the party is provoking mainland China constantly. If that's the case, how can we have a peaceful status quo in this part of the world?
So I think we all agree that some kind of engagement and communications are still necessary. And clearly, the US has a big role to play. And the ruling party in Taiwan also needs to act responsibly. So thank you, Danny and Dean Chao, for speaking to TVBS Meeting Room today. With China's new leadership, the lifting of its COVID-0 policy and the likelihood of reopening to the world very soon, and with Taiwan's upcoming presidential election in just 13 months, as well as a new U.S. Congress with the Republican Party in control of the House of Representatives, and a presidential election in 2024, I think the next 12 months is going to be full of interesting developments, to say the least. Today's episode marks our last in the year of 2022. Thank you for watching. We look forward to bringing you the most credible guests and timely conversations in the year of 2023. See you in the new year, and take care.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
Wenxi.